Hello viewers, thank you for joining me. I review almost everything I complete, so it's no big secret that I don't actually see that much anime in a given year, particularly once you factor in how many different shows come out in a single season these days. In an effort to combat this and stay on top of things, many anime fans have fallen back on that 3-episode rule to determine what they're actually going to continue with, while still experiencing a little of everything. And, though I've never really talked about it, that's a system that I've been at odds with pretty much for as long as it's been around. Personally, if I've decided I'm going to watch an anime, I want to go into it knowing I'm already invested, even if it's a show I end up hating. I can't think of a single series where my opinion hadn't changed between episode 3 and the end. This was something I found myself lingering on a lot while watching Another, a series where my overall view of the show changed a little with every single episode, so you can expect spoilers as I run through those changes. Another begins with a boy named Koichi. Because his dad travels for work, he's moving to the town of Yomiyama to stay with his mother's parents for his last year of junior high. Except, one of his lungs collapses immediately after getting there, leaving him hospitalized for a while, and setting the tone for this series pretty effectively. While he's recovering, he's visited by 3 members of his new class, who introduce themselves as members of Class 3's Countermeasures Committee, though they don't go into exactly what that means yet, not wanting to overwhelm him while he's still hospitalized. But before he can be released, he runs into a girl with an eye patch wandering the hospital at night. She's bringing a doll down to the morgue and introduces herself as May, but she's just as cryptic as all the other kids he's met. Koichi is released from the hospital, and things only keep getting stranger. His aunt, who was also a member of Class 3 back in her day, gives him even more cryptic warnings about always following the class rules. Once he finally gets to school, it becomes clear pretty quickly that Class 3 is isolated from the rest of the school. He sees May in class, but she won't talk to him except to warn Koichi to stay away from her, and all of his other classmates pretend not to know who he's talking about when he asks about her. And I have to say, it was a little reassuring to me that they make it clear very early on that they are pretending. It would have been just a little too cliché and predictable if the mysterious girl that supposedly no one else could see really did turn out to be a ghost. But there's no mistaking everyone else's panicked looks when they see him spending time with her. Some of the other students aren't so great at keeping the secret, and one boy warns Koichi not to mess with things that don't exist. But because acknowledging May's existence would be breaking a class rule, no one can explain why it's so important to stay away from her, and so of course Koichi is only more motivated to uncover the class's secret. And then people start dying. It's slow at first, but one after another, students or close family members of the students in Class 3 start dying in sudden accidents around town. I think Yukari's is the most well-known. She gets a message that her mother's been in an accident, so she rushes out of class and slips down the stairs, impaling herself on her own umbrella. As far as I was familiar with it, this is what Another was best known for, the spectacle of the gory deaths, so I was kind of surprised at how drawn in I was by the story. As the death count rises, the fear and paranoia amongst the students gets stronger, and a lot of them start blaming Koichi for the tragedy starting up this year, until one day he comes into class and everyone's pretending he doesn't exist either. I'd said that my overall view of this show changed with every single episode, and it did a little. There's a lot of information from one episode to the next, but there were some bigger stages to this too. Story-wise, we're at around episode 5, and honestly, up until this point, I really wasn't that impressed. So far, Another was gloomy and creepy and a little gory, but not really scary. If anything, it felt kind of like it was trying too hard. It just really could have used a lesson in moderation. Every scene had this ominous music running under it, even ones that should have been peaceful. I swear there wasn't a single building in the whole town with proper lighting. Personally, I thought they went a little overboard establishing the atmosphere. By the time we see the first death, and only 3 episodes in, it didn't even feel all that shocking. With that much build-up, I was already impatient for it. Like, of course somebody was going to die. It just felt like that sort of town. But that outlook changed pretty drastically around the end of episode 5, when Koichi finally starts getting some answers. Now that they've both stopped existing, Mei figures there's no harm in them being outcast together, and so we finally hear the mostly complete story of Class 3. 26 years ago, one of the students in Class 3 died in a tragic accident. His classmates were devastated, and one day one of them suddenly claimed to be able to see him again. This phenomenon spread until all the members of Class 3 swore they could still see him there with them, encouraged by their teacher, who felt it was just a way to help them deal with their grief, until he started to believe too. This was what isolated Class 3 from the rest of the school, and this madness continued until the boy was included in their graduation ceremony, and a fuzzy image of him even appeared in their class photo. The way Mei explains it, their actions invited death to join their class, and the future Class 3s have been paying the consequences ever since. Starting the next year, right around the time the original death had taken place, the students and their immediate families started dying in freak accidents. The Countermeasures Committee was created to try and stop this curse somehow, but they haven't been very successful. The only thing that has worked is erasing the existence of one of their classmates, like they tried with Mei, but even that's been a very hit-or-miss thing throughout the years, and it clearly hasn't worked this year, which is why they've tried erasing Koichi too, the one who broke the rules. But there's still a little more to it. There's one other person who still acknowledged Mei, Chibiki, the creepy librarian that Koichi gets to know now that he's also invisible. Chibiki fills in the rest of the story for them, and he's probably my favorite character. Yomiyama is a pretty small town, so it's fitting how everything ties back together throughout the years. Chibiki is the librarian now, but 26 years ago he was Class 3's homeroom teacher, the year it all started. Coincidentally, the year Koichi's mother was in Class 3. Koichi grew up in Tokyo, but he was born in this town, the same year his Aunt Reiko was in Class 3. His mother died shortly after his birth, and he pieces together now that she was one of the casualties of the class 15 years ago, so he's about as connected as you can get. Chibiki, plagued with guilt for his role in the original tragedy, hasn't been able to bring himself to leave the school, and has watched his old class suffer year after year since. He explains to the kids that the year after the haunted graduation photo, there was an extra student assigned to Class 3, which they only knew because they didn't have enough desks. But when they tried to look into this, they found that the school records had been corrupted, so there was no way of knowing who the extra was. At first, they didn't think much of it, but then the deaths started up. Chibiki tells them that at the end of the year, the extra student's name disappeared from the class roster, and no one could remember them. The years continued, and these events became a pattern. It soon became clear that it wasn't just official school records that were being altered, but everyone's memories, too. It's worth mentioning that, though I fell into the habit of calling it a curse, everyone else refers to it as a calamity. Chibiki thinks of it more as a natural disaster, just the consequences of their actions all those years ago, but it felt true enough to me. The extras' memories are altered along with everyone else's, and doesn't even know that they're not just like everyone else. So Koichi's reached the dilemma Class 3's been facing for years. They know what's causing the calamity, but not how to figure out who the undead student is, or what to do about it if they did know. Which is not exactly uplifting, but these next few episodes were the high point of the series for me. I loved the little alliance Koichi formed with Mei, and I loved the turn Mei's character took in general. She comes across as being very mysterious, but the more we get to know about her, the more ordinary she seems. She's not really dead or invisible. Her classmates didn't used to treat her any differently from anyone else until the calamity started creeping up on them. You find out later that her fake eye does have some mystical power, but she lost her real one due to a childhood illness. She lives in this creepy doll museum, but the doll maker's her mother, who we learn is still grieving for a child she lost before May. Working on the dolls is her way of coping. I loved that May started to seem more and more real. She was a surprisingly ordinary girl who'd just been subject to a bunch of unfortunate circumstances over the years. And I noticed a few artistic things during the early days of their friendship that I really liked too. I mentioned how dark the town always was. Even the nice days looked overcast. There's a scene where May and Koichi are sitting up on the roof eating lunch together, and you can finally see the sun peeking through the clouds. It's the first truly bright scene in the whole show. In general, Another was one of those series that went a little overboard with the symbolism at times, but that one was really subtle and nice. As the days pass and it becomes clear that making another student non-existent isn't doing anything to stop the calamity, many of the other students drop that act, and they start banding together, trying to come up with another solution. This was really when the series was at its best for me. It kind of reminded me of Stephen King's It, actually, which, if you don't know, is about a group of old friends returning to the haunted town they grew up in to try and stop an evil creature they thought they'd defeated as children. I've never seen any of the film adaptations, but I read the book, and what stuck with me was that it was never really scary. It felt more like an adventure story with horror elements, which was pretty much exactly the feel I got from Another. The kids start reaching out to other people around town and learn that 15 years ago the calamity did stop mid-year, the only instance of it ever stopping once started, and coincidentally the year Reiko was in Class 3, but no one can seem to remember how they accomplished this, just that the class took a trip to the Yomiyama Shrine over the summer, so they prepare to do the same this year. But in the meantime, Reiko takes Koichi and a bunch of his friends on a trip out of town, trying to track down one of her old classmates who'd been heard drunkenly rambling that he'd saved them all. And you know, I really liked their little beach episode. It was a touch on the filler side, but important in its own ways. It tugged at my heart a bit, seeing how immediately they all relaxed once they passed out of the borders of the town. This was our glimpse into what their lives could have been if they'd lived somewhere else. But it can't last, of course. They meet up with Matsunaga, Reiko's old classmate, but he's also blocked out most of his memories of that time, memories that are stirred up, at least a little, when there's another death at the beach. He remembers leaving something in the old Class 3 classroom, a hint or guide for the future Class 3s. Koichi and his friends return and find the recording Matsunaga left behind. It tells the story of their class trip. Matsunaga explains that praying at the shrine had no effect after all. A storm hit on their way down the mountain, killing 2 more of their classmates. Matsunaga made it to the bottom of the mountain, but got into a fight with one of the other students, accidentally killing him in the process. As the days passed, he kept waiting to be found out, but when he finally broke and questioned his classmates about the other students, no one knew who he was talking about. Pretty soon, his memories started to fade as well, and he recorded this tape before he could lose them completely. The only way to stop the calamity is to determine who the extra is and send them back to death where they belong. And this brings us to the third stage of my experience with Another. Class 3 goes on its trip as planned, staying at a lodge up on the shrine's mountain, but the tape gets out to the rest of the class. And this could have been a really good turn. There was one really good moment between Koichi and the original little group who found the tape, where they question whether they could really kill a classmate if they did know who it was. And, locked in a lodge out in the middle of nowhere, with more than a few of their classmates reaching the end of their rope, This atmosphere could have been the first truly scary thing in Another, but they don't give it the chance to build up. Almost immediately after this tension's introduced, everything devolves into chaos. People start dying left and right. It gets to the point where it's honestly sort of comical. And I won't spoil all the mysteries at the very end. It's probably not much of a spoiler that they do discover who the extra is and kill that person. But as a whole, the end was pretty disappointing to me. And there's quite a few parts to that. The series in general was a little lacking in emotion to me. I think some of the best scenes were the ones where May talks about her mother, who we see very little of, and they're not very close, but May's mom does a lot of little things that show she does care, she's just not able to show it, and the rocky relationship with her family was one of the things that made May feel real to me. But given how many deaths there are in this show, I'd say there were only 2 I really cared about. And I know Another's on the shorter side. It would have been hard to really develop the entire class in just 12 episodes, but at times it just felt negligent. Like that death at the beach is a big deal, and I didn't even know that kid's name until I heard 2 of the others talking about him at the start of the next episode. And I can't help feeling like nothing much is really accomplished at the end of it all. They haven't stopped the calamity for good, just the rest of the year, and they lost so many classmates in the process that there's nothing really triumphant about it. Chibiki tries to say at the end of it all that they only lost 10 students, but bullshit. They had to have lost close to 10 students in the lodge incident alone. There's gotta be next to no one left. Another had its ups and downs for me. Perhaps unfortunately, I think what it did best, the middle episodes that made it feel like a friendship adventure story, wasn't necessarily what it was trying to be. I never found it scary. There was some cool imagery, but the CG in some of the gory death scenes was a little distracting sometimes. Another was interesting, but not great. But I don't regret continuing on after I found the first 3 episodes unimpressive. I really appreciate the time I spent watching this series. I did enjoy a lot of it. At the end of the day, I still believe that you can never really judge an anime until you've seen it through to the last episode. Thank you for watching.